viewed in the way they often are. So you may be asking yourself, that's cool, so the NFA was made in the 1930s to kind of solve issues with gangsters and stuff like that. How does the NFA work with modern technology? You know, it's been like 100 years, weapons have developed a lot. How has the NFA moved to accommodate those changes? And the answer is, it hasn't. And you may be thinking, oh, okay, so they don't enforce it anymore, right? And the answer is, yep. Let's look at an example of this. So back in the 30s, most modern rifle platforms looked something like this. You had a wood stock weapon and a very large action that shot a rifle round, right? It was either that or some kind of handgun. But now, in the modern age, technology has changed a lot. And a lot of weapons platforms have gone from looking like that to looking something like this. The mechanism of a modern weapon is completely different compared to what it was 100 years ago. A lot of innovation has happened, but sadly, the law hasn't kept up with it. So the whole point of the NFA originally was so that people wouldn't be able to conceal weapons, right? Of course, the caveat to that is the handgun. Handguns are incredibly small and concealable compared to something like a rifle, which, fun fact, the original versions of the NFA included pistols along with the machine guns and short-barreled weapons before it was removed, given that so many people have them and there would be an uproar over regulating them. So let's say I was to take a rifle like this, and say I was to cut the barrel about right here, that would land me in jail for 10 years. Or at least, you know, up to 10 years. Now what if we take another weapon that uses the exact same action, has the exact same caliber, and a lot of similar features like this? These two, for those who aren't super familiar with Kalashnikov platforms, these two are effectively the same gun. There's differences, of course, for the nerds out there, things like, you know, the gas block, specific platform, blah, 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 but these are both AKs. But if you'll notice, this one has a lot shorter barrel than this one. Now, a second ago, I said if I cut this AK's barrel down, that puts me in jail for 10 years, so how is this one fine? Because legally, this one is a pistol. According to modern law, these two things are the exact same. So if I was to take this stock and put it over on this one, guess what I get? That's right, 10 years. Because according to the NFA, by putting a stock on this pistol, I have now manufactured an illegal short-barreled rifle. However, it doesn't stop there. It is also qualified as an illegal short-barreled rifle if the overall length of the weapon is less than 26 inches. So you can have a legal barrel length and do everything in your power to follow the law, but oh look, your buttstock was an inch too short. Guess that's 10 years. Sorry. I have seen ATF agents pull out measuring tapes on people to see if they're going to jail or not. People who try to follow the law and even the absurdity of laws like this are often regulated and checked to see if they're now a felon. That's not even getting into the fact that the ATF arbitrarily makes different decisions. They'll sell something and say it's totally legal for a decade before saying, actually that's illegal, and if you don't turn it in right now, that's jail for you. And that's not even the entire puzzle when it comes to this stuff. Like, for example, if you take a pistol like this and say I was to put a foregrip on it so I can hold the gun like this, that is also a felony. That short AK I was pointing at earlier, if I decide to put a foregrip on it, jail. Also, if I take a gun like this, and remember the whole point of the NFA, theoretically at least, is to make the gun less concealable. So if I take a pistol like this and I put a stock on it, which makes the gun much less concealable and more than doubles the length of it. If I put a stock on this, that's all because I have now manufactured a short barrel rifle. And here's the worst part about all of this, right? So let's go along with the ATF for a second and pretend that having a short-barreled weapon just fills you with some kind of need to hurt people, right? Okay. If it actually was a law to protect people, then why can you pay $200 and just get by? That is right. If you pay a $200 tax stamp to the ATF, you can get approved to make any one weapon have a suppressor, have a short barrel, what have you. And yeah, like I said earlier, the reason this was originally done is so that they could catch people on charges theoretically before crimes committed, even though it doesn't work in practice like that. But why is something that can be circumvented for $200 such a harsh penalty? Why does the $200 get you out of 10 years in prison instead of something like a fine? If this was just a weird law in the books that wasn't enforced and no one's life was ruined because of it, who cares, right? But lives are ruined over this time. So yeah, in short, repeal the NFA. And SBR and SBS laws are just a small piece of the ridiculous puzzle. There are laws requiring you to have American-made components inside of foreign imported guns, or otherwise it's contraband. There are laws regulating not machine guns, but guns whose mechanism makes it likely if you wanted to break the law, it would be kind of easy to make it a machine gun. There's regulations against those. It got so bad a couple of years ago that
trigger
arm
conversion,
braces, things that you could put on pistols in order to effectively make them stocks, the ATF said they were fine, and then they said that they weren't fine, and then they said that they were fine, just don't touch them to your shoulder, and then they said they weren't fine again. Well, of course, firearms regulations like this aren't as important or as devastating as things we're going to talk about the ATF and the marshals doing to the Weaver family here in a bit. It is merely a foot in the door, but that foot in the door can lead to a lot of tragedy. Now, the reason I bring all of that up isn't just to discuss the ridiculousness of these laws, although that is part of it. It's because the breaking of these laws is what led to everything that would happen afterwards, at least officially. The other reason I want to mention it is, again, the absurdity of these laws is what leads so many people to be sympathetic of Randy Weaver. Anyone who works with firearms has to put up with things like that constantly. So to look at Randy's position and see someone who suffered as much as he did over the same laws, of course it's easy to feel sympathy for him. At least when you focus on Randy the victim and not everything that led up to that victimhood. Now, in reality, was the weapons charge really a way to get a guy just because he sawed off a shotgun barrel? Or was it a way to get someone who was tied to groups like the Aryan Nations and willing to manufacture weapons for them? Kind of like getting Al Capone on tax evasion. While the latter is more than likely true, it's hard to tell considering the government has shown in the past that they will do equal and further dramatic actions over trivial loss. For a lot of people, especially those who come into this case just looking at the end result, it's hard to not perceive Randy as a hopeless victim considering how much the government dressed like an attacker. There's a reason that this story has the reputation it does. So on October the 24th of 1989, Randy delivers the 2 sawn-off shotguns to the federal informant. The informant turns that into the ATF, and the ATF begins to draft charges. Shortly after Fadley makes his report to the ATF, another informant by the name of Rico Valentino informs Randy that Fadley's an undercover agent. I have no idea what kind of internal politics were going on to allow a situation like that to happen, but it did, and Randy confronted Fadley, yelling at him, saying that he knows he's a cop. Fadley then left and never made contact with Weaver again. The ATF spends several months drafting their profile of Randy, and it's here that they begin to smudge the facts a bit. In the ATF reports of Randy, they mention that he is a person of interest in various bank robbings and other crimes committed by Aryan Nations and other militia groups in the region. Even though there was no evidence of this and the informant never indicated that there was any proof Randy was involved in those crimes, the ATF began to add those details to the report in order to embellish the narrative. Because the higher risk Randy seems to be, the more resources can be exhausted in order to arrest him. However, because of the whole incident with Fadley, the ATF no longer have an informant. So, given the fact that Randy has no criminal history, has theoretically worked with law enforcement before considering he was running for sheriff, and has a military background, the feds decide to see if Randy will become their snitch. On June the 12th of 1990, federal agents came to Randy Weaver asking him to be their informant, and Randy replied by telling them where they can shove that offer. Not only that, but immediately after being asked, Randy sent letters to various people that he had contacts with in Aryan Nations and other groups, letting them know that the feds are trying to get an informant. This further angered the ATF because even if he wasn't doing it out of a love for the Aryan Nations and was more so doing it out of a hatred for the government, he's still doing a lot to help the Aryan Nations along. So in December of 1990, over a year since the actual crime was committed, charges were drafted accusing Randy of allegedly selling 2 short-barreled shotguns to an undercover informant. The ATF was afraid of approaching Randy at his house to arrest him. So instead, they pose as a group of motorists whose car had broken down at the base of Ruby Ridge. Randy and Vicky drive down to help the group of people out, and as soon as Randy leans over the hood, they pull their weapons and arrest both Randy and Vicky. As he was being arrested, Randy said, "Haha, good trick, you won't get me with that one again." So on January 17th of 1991, Randy Weaver is arrested and charged. Because the crimes he was being charged with were non-violent and he didn't seem to be a flight risk, he was released on bail with the trial date set for February the 19th of 1991. And here we get another disparity in the events of Ruby Ridge. Randy met with his probation officer and lodger one time each. Randy was fed up with any kind of bureaucrat at this point and didn't want to talk to him, so he just told them to send him a letter when they needed to speak to him. Shortly after the court date was set, the date was moved from February the 19th to February the 20th to allow more travel time for people attending the trial, given that it was shortly after a federal holiday. So okay, the date gets pushed back to one day. No big deal. Well, it wouldn't have been a big deal had Randy's probation officer not sent him a letter saying that the court date was not moved by one day, but instead by 1 month and 1 day. The letter from the probation officer said that the court date had been moved to March the 20th. More letters were sent to Randy correcting the date after this mistake was discovered, but it seems that Randy didn't check his P.O. box up until after the date of February the 20th. When February the 20th passes and Randy didn't appear at the court date that he didn't know he was supposed to be at, Randy was then charged with failure to appear in court. Randy's defense attorney pleaded with the judge that if Randy shows up by March the 20th, that the failure to appear in court will be dropped. But the judge isn't having it, and on March the 14th, he is officially charged and now considered a fugitive from justice. This does seem a bit extreme from the judge's point of view, right? An individual was given the wrong date, so when he doesn't show up on the correct date that you didn't tell him about, you charge him with failure to appear.
Now, I will say it can be argued that the responsibility of Weaver falls on his legal team. Again, I feel the judge should have had some level of leniency because it was Weaver's defense that messed up, not Weaver. But it also seems that Weaver's defense messed up a lot. Like, for example, at one point, Weaver's lawyer told him if he lost the trial, they would lose their home and property. And that just flat out wasn't true.
The one piece of, I guess, credit you could give the judge for his reasoning to go ahead and charge Randy anyway is there were some contributing factors implying that Randy never planned to appear in court in the first place. For example, after his initial arrest, he just quit coming off the mountain. And any level of paranoia he had,
Jesus Christ! Like, dude, I didn't run until the just then, and it's like, what?
To be a federal informant.
Hey, you died too, you fucking idiot.
Parked on the side of the road
Died the second you did it.
And
fucking
also,
stupid thirsty sweats.
so
Pushing
Vicky
you like
Weaver,
fucking sharks.
he was also arrested along with
Stupid,
Randy
tactless,
on
low
January
IQ,
17th,
pieces
was
of shit, middle of the
slightly
road,
perturbed
pieces
by
of
the
shit.
federal government, if
And
you
he's
could
dead.
imagine,
He's been dead.
After getting arrested.
Fucking guy died the second he shot me.
So,
Idiot.
in between the time of their arrest and Randy's court date, she sent a couple of letters to the U.S. Attorney's Office for Idaho, but the letters were addressed to the entirety of the United States.
Leave me alone.
And in those letters, for one, she opens by addressing it to the, quote, servants of the Queen of Babylon, and some excerpts from those letters include, "We, the Weaver family, have been shown by our Savior and King, Yahshua, the Messiah of Saxon Israel, that we are to stay separated on this mountain and not leave. We will obey our lawgiver and king. Whether we live or whether we die, we will not obey your lawless government." Because of that last line, especially, a lot of people in government believe that Randy never planned to appear in court in the first place. And to further increase the distrust of the Weaver family, another line from that same letter reads, "A long forgotten wind is starting to blow. Do you hear the approaching thunder? It is that of the awakened Saxon.
Because it's making us all
War
stupider
is
by
upon the
reading
land.
it. It's stupid.
The tyrant's blood will
Fucking
flow."
stupid.
Now, what she probably meant,
Like these pieces of
by
shit who
that
push all
last
day
part,
instead of
she's
using
like
their
invoking
brains.
a lot of biblical imagery or whatnot. But because again, as we talked about earlier, very Old Testament, very, you know, doomsday, brimstone, what have you. What she's doing there is talking about like when God comes back, when the rapture happens, they're gonna get what's coming to them. But that's not how the government read it. The government read the tyrant's blood will flow and effectively took that to mean intent. Now, regardless of if you see Vicky's letters as either intent to not show up to court and intent to hurt federal agents, or you see it as the 1991 equivalent of your drunk aunt on Facebook, I think it's safe to say charging Randy with failure to appear in court when he was not given the correct court date is ridiculous outright. Simply because that's not how laws work. If someone says, I'm not going to appear in court, we don't charge them with failure to appear in court until they actually don't appear in court. And yes, technically, Randy didn't because he didn't show up on February 20th, but he was never told February 20th. He was told March the 20th. Everything I'm talking about would get heavily scrutinized and ran over 1,000 times in the court trials to follow. So anyway, Randy's attorney begins to write letters to him explaining the situation and telling him that Randy needs to come down to make peace with local law enforcement. At this point, Randy is full bore convinced that there is some kind of conspiracy against him because he gets arrested by undercover cops and then he's given a court date.
I mean, it is the
actually,
government.
he doesn't have to show up on that day. He can show up at this day instead. And then he's told, because you didn't show up on that original day, you're going to jail.
A criminal
on March
now.
the 11th, Randy's attorney
Do what we
gets
say
two
or you're a
neighbors of
criminal.
The Weavers, who are friends with the Weavers, to go up the mountain and
Do what we
ask
say.
Randy what
Show
he
up
wants
when
to
we
do.
tell you or you're
Randy
a criminal.
sends them back with a letter giving out his list of demands for him to come back down the mountain. Things in this list include he wants his pistol back that was taken from him when he was arrested by the undercover agents. He wants the charge regarding failure to appear to be dropped, and he wants the judge to apologize to him for at one point calling him paranoid. Now, while this was originally the ATF's case because it involved the manufacturing of short-barreled shotguns, Randy is now a fugitive from justice. So the ATF passes the case off to the United States Marshals. When the ATF passes off the case to the Marshals, I
mean, that's better than the
report
ATF.
or psychological evaluation or what have you of Randy Weaver is pretty dumb. Not only do they include things I mentioned earlier, like they think he has, you know, connections to a lot of bank robberies or other crimes that have occurred, but they just get stuff wrong. Like at several points in the description of Randy, it refers to him as Mr. Randall, confusing his last name to be Randall. So the Marshals enter the scenario thinking they're dealing with a combatant who's ready to kill at a moment's notice. To give you an idea of how long things take in government as well, when the ATF passed the case over to the Marshals, it took an entire year before the Marshals actually did it. They spent a year in technicalities and planning and stuff like that. During that entire time, Randy maybe occasionally came down from the mountain, but for the most part just lived up there with a warrant for his arrest. The first thing the Marshals tried was on March the 4th of 1992, when two Marshals simply walked up to the property and told Weaver there was a warrant for his arrest. Weaver, who had a rifle over his back, told the two men that they were trespassing on private property and to get lost. And the men just drove off the property without incident. After this, the Marshals began something that they called Operation Northern Exposure. This was a mass surveillance campaign on the Weaver household. The Marshals planted cameras and microphones all over properties in and around the Weaver residence. They would do this by quite literally sneaking in camouflage at night, setting up cameras, and then leaving before being spotted. A lot of the images and videos you see of the Weavers, both just standing outside of their house, or playing, or running from gunfire, or what have you, were taken with these surveillance cameras. This observation would continue for 4 months, with the Marshals not only checking in on the camera's feed every day, but occasionally performing missions onto the Weavers' property to get more information about the household. And it's from here that a lot of aspects of the Weavers' lives were made known to investigators. At this time, the Weavers' oldest daughter, Sarah, was 16, their son Samuel was 14, their daughter Rachel was 10, and they just had a baby 10 months earlier named Elisheba, a young girl. The Weavers had a lot of animals, from chickens to horses, and the daughters would often ride the horses while Randy and his son Samuel would play together or shoot guns around the house. Vicky, who was still nursing the 10-month-old child, would normally stay with the children while Randy performed most of the work around the house. It seemed that they were entirely self-sufficient. They grew their own crops, they had a well on the property that allowed for clean water, the kids were homeschooled, as you could imagine, so day in and day out, they just went about their activities and chores amongst each other. Randy had a particular tinge of paranoia about him. Not only did he travel everywhere with a rifle over his back, but anytime a vehicle would get too close to the bottom of a hill, Randy would freak out and take a defensive position behind a rock or a tree until the noise went away. He was constantly paranoid that someone was watching him, and as it turned out, they were. This paranoia was fueled further on May the 5th when one of the Weaver family members discovered one of the hidden cameras. From here, Weaver became much more tactical in all of his planning. While it was regular for when any of the Weaver family members left the perimeter of the house, they would always bring a gun with them for fear of a bear or mountain lion, the demeanor of the house noticeably shifted. Less time was spent outside than need be, and again, Randy seemed to be much more paranoid. Or I guess paranoid isn't the right word if they're actually coming to get you. Much more defensive, we'll say. It was also around this time that a friend of Randy's named Kevin Harris began to stay at Ruby Ridge with them. Kevin Harris was a younger guy, in his mid-20s at the time all of this went down. Harris also had no affiliations with the very radicals. Instead, he was just a friend of Randy's. Years back, when Harris was a teenager, he stayed with Randy and Vicky for a while. So seemingly, because Randy was paranoid as to who he could trust, he invited an old friend to help him keep watch of the house. Anytime there was a noise or something was amiss around the house, Harris and Randy could be seen stepping out on the porch with rifles over their shoulder, looking for what was the matter. And for months, this was the routine. The 7 people within the house maintained their shifts, I guess except the baby, but the 6 other people maintained their shifts, going about their chores, keeping a watchful eye for anyone who may approach. Later testimonials from the family would say that they were aware of the danger Randy was in, you know, being a fugitive from justice and all, but they figured no one would hurt them or no real danger would befall.
Yes, the government. None of us really think that the government's just going to come kill you. Nobody really believes that, not even him. They're like, will this really be that bad?
Content on maintaining that position for the rest of their lives. That is, until the events of August 21st. Because if you don't know anything else about the Ruby Ridge incident, you know about the events of August the 21st and August the 22nd, 1992.
Now, the events of August the 21st are heavily debated and complicated, so I thought it would be easier to make a stupid little map. See, I got like a river over here, and then trees over there. I guess the trees don't have like but because it's just an aerial view looking down, you wouldn't see the trunks. So it's really a more accurate tree if you think about it. Anyway, I do want to emphasize that this is in no way accurate and can't even be qualified as a guess. This is just a diagram to show you particular moments when important things happen. I have no idea if this is where the trails go. They could go that way. They could go that way. I know people walked in these areas relative to each other, so I made up a direction they might have walked. This is more of a vision, really. But imagine this as an aerial view with the Weaver cabin in the middle, the slope down to the roadway and getting off Ruby Ridge is down here, and this area behind the cabin is elevated above it, higher ridge lines behind the cabin itself. So the U.S. Marshals were so cautious and complicated about the way they were going to arrest Randy that they had theorized maybe they could purchase a piece of property somewhere around here and then have 2 marshals undercover as a husband and wife move into the area to get close to Randy and then eventually arrest him. Apparently that plan had been tentatively approved, so some records say that the mission on August the 21st was to do reconnaissance for that,
while others say it was just a standard part of their operation. As mentioned, they would go onto the property, set up surveillance cameras, do recon, and then ditch. It should also be noted that they weren't doing these reconnaissance missions in police uniforms or anything to identify themselves as cops. Instead, they were doing it in full camouflage with rifles and night vision goggles. That detail will be important when we get to the nuance of the events. Also, one of the reasons they were going in so armed to the teeth, other than, what they saw in the surveillance cameras, is on April the 18th, one day after they set up their cameras, someone reported to someone else at the Marshal Service that Randy was shooting at helicopters. More specifically, that he was shooting at one of Geraldo Rivera's helicopters. No one has ever found the source of this information. The Rivera team never reported it. Randy denies it. So who knows where that came from? But these guys were afraid if they were spotted at all that they would be like a helicopter and be shot at. At 4:30 a.m. on Friday, August the 21st, 6 U.S. Marshals made entry onto the Weaver property. For the sake of this diagram, we'll say they entered here. The 6 men split into 2 teams. One team takes off an overwatch position above the Weaver cabin, and their other team, the 3 men who are their reconnaissance element, continues operations on the lower altitude side of the cabin itself. This goes on for a couple hours in the early morning before the recce element links up with their OP element. It seems that here the 6 men share information with each other before they begin to fall back from the property, with the reconnaissance team continuing on their swing over to the right side of the cabin, at least right side in this diagram, and the overwatch position goes back the way they came. Now, I don't know whose idea this next thing I'm about to say was. What's wild is everything I've said so far pretty uncontested on both sides. And for some reason, this next part is also uncontested, although the Fed should really reconsider. One of the agents in the reconnaissance element decided to throw rocks at the cabin to test the reaction of the Weaver's dog. The Weavers had this really big lab mix dog whose name was Stryker. So the recce team wanted to see if Stryker would react to throwing rocks at the house. I don't know who that benefits, what that does. It's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. Surprisingly enough, it's not the dumbest thing in this story. That will come later, but it's a close second. So from about 200 yards away from the cabin, they begin throwing rocks at the cabin itself. Now, here's our first divergence. The Marshals would later say that the reason Stryker became alerted to the reconnaissance team is that Stryker was already making his way outside as they heard a vehicle approaching. Along with Stryker came the 3 men in the cabin, or 2 men and young boy, Samuel Weaver. However, what everyone else says, and what I think is much more likely, is that when testing if dogs react to you throwing rocks at them, the answer is yes. Stryker begins to take off towards the team of agents. The fact that Stryker ran that direction further proves the point that he probably wasn't hearing the car, he was hearing the people throwing rocks at him. The reconnaissance element, afraid of being spotted, even though their behavior would indicate otherwise, continue to make their way back down towards the lower altitude end of the cabin, with Stryker hot on their trail. Again, the 3 people who are now outside of the cabin with Stryker are Randy, his son Samuel, and Harris. They are none the wiser to federal agents being this close to them. When they hear Stryker begin to bark and chase something, they assume it's some kind of animal. So the men take their rifles and run outside and hope that Stryker has caught some kind of deer or game animal because they had just ran out of meat in the cabin. That's another thing of note that I'll probably forget to mention as I continue talking about this. Over the course of the siege, the entire Weaver family had almost nothing to eat. Randy tells Samuel and Harris to chase after Stryker while Randy follows the trail. He would later make comments that he didn't want to chase after Stryker directly because there wasn't a trail there, or it was a rough trail and he was getting too old for that. So Sam and Harris begin to follow in the direction that Stryker is running. As you can probably think looking at this diagram, that's a bad sign. Randy begins to make his way down the more established trail, heading to a point that he thinks Stryker will wind up at. Again, I'm making up all these trails. Maybe like these 2 intersect at some point, so Randy's heading down there. I don't know. What happens instead is Randy runs into the 3 people in the observation team that are also making their way down the mountain. So at
God damn it! Fuck was that? Oh thank God. Fuck, he interrupted my med kit, which is so annoying. I hope it doesn't cost me the match. Ugh. I saw something. Tense. I need help, damn it, and it's not here. Or... Oh, there's one. Nice, nice. Too exposed. God damn it, fucking NPC is so annoying. NPC is so annoying. Four left. I gotta get in the storm. Which is hard. I've got, like, that's up and over the ridge, I think. Oh, no. No, gotta get out, gotta get out. There. feel like I'm very exposed. Oh god. Get down. Keep moving. Fuck was that? Fuck. No, get me out of this. No, out of it, 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 out of it. Oh. Wah! I couldn't keep. I can't keep fucking shots in the mags. Constantly firing an empty mag at people. It's so annoying because they never stop. They never stop pressuring me. I can't get them. I can't get any fucking bullets in the mag. Try to reload that shotgun for the last goddamn 7 minutes because you push, 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 push. Can't reload and fight them at the same time because they don't stop. They're like these bloodthirsty fucking animals who fucking push W and reduce brain cells to 0. I can't do anything. Deal with 3 thirsty assholes and the one guy who has like a vantage point just shoots me. And it's like, come on, man. Like, let me reload a mag. Instead of fighting 3 thirsty assholes who will never, ever have sex in their entire lives. Come on, man. What? What? Oh my god. Watching you guys fight makes me sick.
At some point, these two cross paths. So Randy is jogging down the hill when all of a sudden, someone holding a rifle and dressed in full camouflage stands up, points a gun at him, and says, "Freeze, Randy." Randy immediately recognizes this as a federal agent. Randy does not fire upon the federal agent or attempt to get his gun off of his shoulder. Either that be because he didn't think he would win the draw, or he didn't want to kill him. I'll let you decide. But what Randy does do is say F you, and then begin sprinting back up the hill. As this is happening, the Recce team, being chased by Stryker, makes their way down to a junction at the bottom of the hill known as the Y. It was called this because it was a literal Y in the trail, and in the trials that would follow, the incident at the Y was a large point of contention. Now, we know that Stryker, Sam, Harris, and the 3 men in the reconnaissance team all made it to the Y. And from there is where it gets messy. The U.S. Marshals would claim for over a year that Sam and Harris were the instigators in what was about to happen, and that everything they did was in accordance with standard procedure. However, the series of events that I'm going to tell is the series of events that was eventually determined to be most likely in the trials that followed. Because the Fed's side of this changed faces a lot and kept coming out to different conclusions, different series of events, whereas the Weaver side of it stayed pretty consistent and also made the most sense with evidence that was found at the trail. So going off of that narrative, and this is the narrative that a jury would eventually agree to, the reconnaissance team attempted to hide in the roadside along the Y. Stryker, still seeing the reconnaissance team, makes a beeline directly for them, again with Sam and Harris right behind him. It seems that what most likely happened is, in order to not be seen, I guess, one of the federal agents shot Stryker. Again, insert meme about feds shooting dogs. Now, this is the big point of contention in all of this that shapes a lot of what happened moving forward. The federal agents never identified themselves as federal agents. Sure, it seems that Randy made the call when he ran into them, but these two over here probably aren't thinking about that. They're thinking about what animal they're going to run into, and all of a sudden there's a gunshot and the dog is dead. Because the federal agents never identified themselves, all
You shot my dog, asshole.
Camo shoot their dog. Randy's testimony would later attest to this, as he said when he turned to sprint, he heard a gunshot and then Stryker yelled. This seems to be, although not explicitly said, but it seems to be the reason that the Overwatch team didn't try to chase Weaver back up the trail. Now, it could also be because they were afraid he was gonna, run up there and turn around and shoot him or what have you. But I believe after hearing the gunshot, they ran over here to reinforce their reconnaissance team. As soon as Stryker was shot, 14-year-old Samuel Weaver saw the man who shot his dog and said, "You shot my dog, you son of a bitch," as he raised his rifle and fired 3 rounds, according to most reports, at the man who did it. A federal agent raised his gun in return. By forensic reports, it was most likely William Deegan, raised his gun and fired, shooting Sam in the arm. As soon as Sam is hit, he turns his back away from the federal agents and begins to run backwards to where Harris was. Sam had got a little bit in front of Harris, so Sam is around here and Harris is more back here. As soon as Harris sees Sam get shot, he raises his rifle and shoots at the guy who just shot Sam. That round fired from Harris's gun went into the chest of U.S. Marshal William Deegan, and Deegan fell to the ground, dead. The first death at Ruby Ridge, and sadly, not the last. The 3 agents began returning fire, and in the course of this, someone shot the retreating Samuel Weaver in the back. And with that, 14-year-old Samuel Weaver fell dead at the Y, 500 yards away from his home. Now, I'm not entirely sure what the distance of this engagement was. The way it's described, this makes it look like they're 10 feet
Yeah,
from
where
each
it's
other.
described as they
Realistically,
gunned
I
his,
think they were moving,
his
like,
dog down,
maybe
so
50 yards from
it
each
was
other,
on.
something like that. Definitely, close enough for gunfighting distance.
Shoot my dog, I might shoot you
far
too.
enough that the 2 surviving agents have a chance to hunker down and not immediately be in fear of being shot. This is further supported because Harris only fires a couple more rounds before he checks Sam's body, sees that Sam is dead, and books it back towards the cabin. If you'll remember, I mentioned earlier, pretty much every member of the Weaver family took a gun with them when they left the home. One of the reasons they did this, other than animals, is they had a code between them that if anyone was ever lost, they can fire a gun in the air and other people will know to come that direction. When Randy had ran into the federal agents down here, he ran back towards the cabin and began yelling, "Ambush." After Randy heard the gunshots at the Y, he began firing his shotgun into the air in order to signal back to Harris and Sam where to run in case they get turned around. So eventually, both Harris and Randy make their way back to the cabin. And as soon as they get there, Harris releases the news that Sam's been killed. The reaction by the family is as can be expected. Vicky screaming, crying, Randy desolate, the girls not knowing what to do. Even hearing some of them talk about it to this day, it's still overwhelming to them that their brother died in such a horrific manner. Regardless of how you feel about Weaver or the feds or anyone involved in this story, I think we can all agree that the real tragedy of it all falls on the kids. This all occurred around 10:30 a.m. Shortly after this, it seems that all 6 or 5 now remaining men of the Marshals team link up. 2 of them head to a local neighbor's house and call not only the Marshals department, but the local police in order to request assistance. Now, here's an important detail about everything involving the federal agents. They told the police, as well as eventually the FBI and their home office, that one of their agents had been killed, but never said anything about one of the Weavers being killed. As a matter of fact, they would go on to state several times in trials after this that they didn't know Sammy Weaver had been killed. Now, that is possible. Gunfights can be hectic, but until the events we're going to talk about later, that option was never even considered. The Marshals also did not mention the fact, again until later in trial, that they were chased by the dog, took up positions, and began fighting back. The narrative was instead that the Marshals were doing their recon and were attacked by the Weavers, resulting in the death of an agent. They also used language to imply that the gunfight was still going on and they were still being held down, which would imply there was a lot more people and a lot more manpower on the Weaver side than were actually in the cabin. If you're being held down for over an hour, there are hundreds, if not thousands of rounds with shell casings expelled all over the ground and trees in the area torn to shreds. The details of what actually happened at the Y would come up later in the story, but we'll get to that. The call to 911 is made around 11:20 a.m. Because of the level of complexity, considering who all is involved, how many channels it had to go through, the local police wouldn't show up to assist the Marshals until 8:30 p.m. Between the time of the call and the Marshals showing up, Vicky Weaver decides in the cabin that she's going to go get her boy's body. So, as dangerous as it is, considering the Marshals were right there shooting at them a minute ago, perhaps the Weavers consider that that was during a gunfight, and if they simply walk out, they won't be shot at. So, Randy and Vicky make their way back to the Y, where they recovered their son's body. Knowing that they're still under surveillance and likely won't be able to bury him right now, they place him in a small shed out behind their cabin. As the family continues to mourn the loss, local police show up, get the body of Deegan out of there, and return back to the base at the bottom of Ruby Ridge around 1 a.m. Now, again, the series of events that I just described are the way that it would come out at the end of all of this. But the narrative at this time is that Marshals were checking out the property, one of them got gunned down, and the Weavers are thirsty for blood. It's because of that that the FBI took such extreme measures that we're going to talk about in just a second. Following this, the siege at Ruby Ridge exploded. Now, it wasn't just a guy who had a warrant for his arrest and wouldn't leave his house. Now, it was a group of people who killed federal agents. Immediately, neighbors were evacuated from their homes and all roads in and out of the area were shut down. Anytime a federal agent is killed, it immediately becomes the FBI's case. So now, for the second time in this story, one government agency passes it off to another when the U.S. Marshals pass the case to the FBI. The narrative that was given to the FBI was that a group of dangerous militant members knowingly fired on and killed a federal agent, and that non-combatants within the house, in other words, Vicky and the children, could be hostages held captive by Weaver and Harris, and that the Marshals don't know how many people may be in the cabin at this time. Because of this, the FBI's response was extremely aggressive. For one, the FBI sent in the Hostage Rescue Team, or HRT, a group trained and usually tasked with saving hostages from active shooter scenarios. The HRT arrived at the mobile base at the bottom of Ruby Ridge at 4:45 a.m. in the early morning hours of Saturday, August 22nd. FBI agent Gene Glenn, who oversaw the operation, arrived a few hours earlier and began setting up checkpoints and different positions for FBI team members. The governor of Idaho declared the situation a state of emergency, which allowed the FBI and local law enforcement to employ things from the Idaho National Guard. What this meant is that local agents now began to employ things like helicopters and armored personnel carriers to the base of Ruby Ridge. Due to the information the FBI was given that the individuals in the cabin may take the rest of the family as hostages and that they're knowingly just trying to kill as many federal agents as they can, the FBI employed a set of very controversial rules of engagement. Now, for those that don't know, rules of engagement is effectively the rules an officer or soldier or what have you have to follow in order to engage the enemy. What this typically looks like, for example, United States police officers, is a police officer is not allowed to use lethal force unless they believe their life or the life of someone else is in immediate danger. So if you go up and start talking to a guy and you see a gun on his hip, you can't just pull your gun and shoot him, but say that guy gets mad and then pulls the gun and starts to point it at someone, then you can probably shoot him. You only take the life of another individual in the moments that would save another life. Now, of course, these rules in, say, military and active war zones are much different. In cases where it's already understood that enemy forces are hostile, it could be something like if you see someone with a gun, not necessarily pointing it at anyone. In extreme cases, it could be, you know, military-aged males or something like that could qualify for your ROE. But on American soil, we typically like to keep the idea that the police won't kill someone unless they're actively about to kill someone else. After a lot of debate and confirming their rules of engagement with the home base back in Washington, at 2:30 p.m., the following rules of engagement were given to HRT members. A. If any adult male in the compound is observed with a weapon prior to the surrender announcement, deadly force can and should be employed, if the shot can be taken without endangering any children. B. If any adult in the compound is observed with a weapon after the surrender announcement is made and is not attempting to surrender, deadly force can and should be employed to neutralize the individual. C. If compromised by any animal, dog, that animal should be eliminated. And D. Any subjects other than Randall Weaver, Vicky Weaver, Kevin Harris presenting threats of death or grievous bodily harm, the FBI rules of deadly force are in effect. Deadly force can be utilized to prevent the death or grievous bodily injury of oneself or that of another. It is that first one, and yeah, the thing that, like, if a dog barks at you, you can shoot it. But insert ATF shooting dog meme here. But it's the first one that gained so much controversy in the trials that would follow. Anyone that just has a gun and prior to a surrender announcement. It was known on surveillance, and especially after what just happened, the guys are going to be walking around holding rifles or having a rifle slung over their arm. Without identifying yourself or telling them to freeze or stop or give up or anything, you just kill them. And while rules like that may be justified if there's someone inside holding a gun to the kids' heads, out of every bit of information that the feds have at this point, that is an absurd conclusion to jump to. Even not considering the fact that the agent shot first never identified themselves. Several FBI agents would later testify that they thought the ROE was overkill and shouldn't have been employed, again, against a guy who missed a court date. But now an agent was dead and the feds wanted someone to pay for it. Meanwhile, inside of the cabin, the family was desolate. After setting Sam in the shed, according to Sarah Weaver, the family just kind of sat around in silence. The three adults discussed if they should walk out and surrender, but they were all afraid because the feds shot first without giving any clarity as to what they were doing there or telling them to stop, be arrested, what have you, or they did with Randy, at least not in Sam's case. They all figured that after Harris shot a marshal, they were probably just going to kill him on sight. So the family sat around for a while. They didn't know what to do. Sarah remarks that Vicky, at one point, it had began to rain a little bit, and Vicky said that she should put out some buckets of water to collect rainfall because they probably won't be able to go down to the well while this is going on. Kind of just in a state of shock, considering, you know, she just lost her boy. While this was happening, the HRT began to take up positions on the ridges around the cabin. One of the snipers who took position was an agent named Juan Oriucci. After being in position for only a couple hours, Randy and Harris, with rifles slung over their arm, make their way out to the backyard. According to the Weavers, Randy had said that he wants to go check on Sam and make sure no animals or insects got to him over the night. Randy walks out to the shed, turns his back towards the ridge that he doesn't know Horiuchi is on, and as he is facing the cabin, he reaches up to unlatch the door. As soon as he does, a shot rings out. Horiuchi was aiming for Randy's spine, but given that he moved a bit at the last moment, the shot hit Randy in the shoulder. Randy collapsed, and Sarah, the oldest daughter, sprinted outside to help his dad. Sarah would later remark that she figured a sniper wouldn't shoot a young girl, so she stood in between Randy and where she thought the shot came from. Randy begins to yell that he's been hit, and Sarah and Harris help him stand up, and the three of them begin running back to the cabin. The back door of the Weaver cabin had a bungee cord attached to the top of it, so that way the door was always shut. You know, no one could leave the door open and let all the cooler hot air out. So Vicky Weaver, while holding their 10-month-old child, was standing just behind the door, holding it open so that the three of them could run back inside. As this is happening, Lon Horiuchi rechambers another round and tries to get a shot on Harris, who is running at the back of the group. So the three of them are running in, and Horiuchi points his rifle a little bit in front of Harris to try to lead the shot. Horiuchi fires, the shot goes through the air, it hits Harris in the side, the bullet continues through Harris, goes through the window of the back door, and hits Vicky Weaver in the head. At 5:58 p.m., Vicky Weaver was killed instantly.
What was that? It was supposed to fill me up and it didn't. Damn it.
To the ground, and it was at the same moment the shot went through, so Vicky fell to the ground as well. And then the three others began to stand up and assess themselves, except for Vicky. Randy, seeing Vicky lying on the ground, he hears the muffled cries of their baby, which was underneath Vicky. So Randy Weaver takes his wife's body and throws it off of their child so that the baby is its mother. Everyone within the house began screaming and crying. Randy was trying to comfort the baby, rocking back and forth, and man, it is a nightmare scenario. I understand having an issue with the government, right? Or I understand having an issue with laws that you see as unjust. Randy Weaver expected violence to befall him. And while I think, at least at the beginning of this, he might have been in a state of love, he was willing to die for it, to, not go down the fight, so to speak. But I don't think he ever imagined that his family might pay the price. But nevertheless, they did. I cannot imagine what the following hours in that cabin. Your son is dead in the shed, and your wife's dead on the floor. And now it's just you, your buddy you brought into this, who's now bleeding out on the kitchen floor, and your three daughters. And of course, absolutely, Randy should have no reason to expect him not showing up to court would mean the feds show up and kill his family. But in his writings and the stories Weaver would tell, he would mention how he felt a guilt, a responsibility in all of this. For everyone involved, especially the daughters who, were caught up in the middle of all this, I can't imagine what that horror felt like.
A couple of points I want to mention here. For one, I got a technical error wrong with what I just said. I got the order that the bullet went through Harris and Vicky wrong. So in reality, the door was kind of bladed at like an odd angle from where Horiuchi was. So when Horiuchi fired, Vicky was actually hit first, and then it hit the door, and then it hit Harris. That explains two things. For one, it explains why Harris's wounds would be much, much worse off than Randy's, because Randy's shot went through and was pretty okay, but Harris's bullet stayed inside of him, and that's what caused the wound to become so grotesque. The other thing that does is provide further evidence to the idea that Horiuchi had to know that he hit Vicky, because she would have been the first thing he saw through the scope. The other thing I want to mention, just to put everything into perspective, is how now 2 people are dead with a guy who at the beginning of all of this...
Wow!
If you'll remember, all the way back when he missed his first
idiots.
appearance, Randy sent down a list of negotiations that he wanted to make with the local law enforcement. And in testimonies that would come after this, right before Randy set out of the cabin and...
Any ammo, but I went all over the place and got no ammo.
2 people have been killed before a word was said.
Now, after Horiuchi took the shot, he said that the first one was a hit. He saw Randy fall down, hold his shoulder and everything. But he said the second shot was a miss. According to Horiuchi, he fired the shot, didn't see anyone get hit, and they fell back into the cabin, and the standoff continued. Now, to this day, the official report is that Horiuchi did not know that Vicky Weaver had been killed. And again, they didn't even know that Sam Weaver had been killed. So at this point, the feds think that all members of the family are still alive. Now, there is some controversy around Horiuchi's statement. Some people have theorized that perhaps Horiuchi did know and either didn't want to report it or simply didn't care. That night, when he went to a local hotel to get some rest, he drew a picture of what the shot looked like on a piece of paper, and he draws a person there that supposedly the shot made contact with. Is this Harris that he's drawing the stick figure of? Is this Vicky? We don't know, but speculate how you will. Horiuchi's second shot would be one of the most criticized events of the entire Ruby Ridge incident. The Department of Justice found that while the first shot followed the rules of engagement, as absurd as they were, the second shot was completely unconstitutional because it was against a group of people who posed no immediate threat to you. They were running back for cover and running away from you, and yet he still took the shot. Horiuchi himself would get into legal trouble following the Ruby Ridge incident, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. After Horiuchi finds his shots, the FBI says, oh yeah, we're supposed to ask them to come out. Just keep in mind, up until this point, no one has said a word. There's no come out, Weaver. You're wanted for arrest. Come out with your hands up. There's no ask to surrender.
We killed your son. No biggie. You're under arrest finally.
PM, they roll an APC up to like 30 feet
Megaphone.
out front of Weaver's house.
Yep.
And then through
Be
a
like, you're under
megaphone,
arrest, sir.
which they will not face towards
You
the
killed
house
my
because they're afraid
son,
of getting shot. So
fuckers.
they're standing in the back of the APC, just like
You're going to
pointing it
jail,
at the
sir.
ground. They tell Randy that they have a warrant for his arrest, and now he should come out. The feds wait there for a while and then drive the APC back down the hill. It's also beginning at this point that the Weavers don't step out of the house again for anything. Again, they were standing inside of the house near a window and Vicky got shot. So for the rest of the siege, they crawl around on the floor underneath every window to get from one room of the house to the other. Harris is losing so much blood and in so much pain at one point in the night, he asks Randy to kill him. And Randy tells Harris that he can't do that, and if he wants that to happen, Harris has got to do it himself. Using what medical equipment they have, they try to stop the wound, but very quickly, infection begins to set in. For the rest of the standoff, Harris lies on the kitchen floor, bleeding and shivering as his wound gets worse and worse. The next day, August 23rd, the FBI roll up once again in an APC and begin to talk on the megaphone. Now, I heard some reports say that the line I'm about to mention took place on August 23rd, but others, like the DOJ, say it was August 24th, so it was probably the 24th. But at some point during the whole, tank rolling up the hill and then a negotiator, talking over a megaphone, one of them makes a comment to Vicky. So Randy and the family assumed that the FBI knew that Vicky had been killed, right? Because you're looking through a scope and you can see the doorway and you fire and get a perfect headshot. So surely whoever took the shot knows that he shot a woman inside of the house. And again, as we talked about, maybe he did and didn't say anything, but as far as the FBI team down at the base of the mountain goes, they had no clue. So again, on the morning of the 23rd or the 24th, whoever's talking on the megaphone, trying to start conversation, says, "Hey, what did Vicky have for breakfast this morning?
Wow.
Anything good?"
I don't like that at all.
Now, again, to the FBI, this is them trying to, start a dialogue. To
That's
the
totally
Weavers,
wasted a potion.
this was the most evil thing anyone could do ever. Because, again, the Weavers assume that the FBI knows Vicky's dead. So imagine someone shows up, shoots your wife in the face, and then gets on a speaker and goes, "Hey, what'd she have for breakfast this morning, huh? Would it be, I don't know, a bullet?" So to put yourself in Randy's point of view and the rest of the family during this, you've spent a long time waiting for the government to show up, and then they show up and without announcing themselves, kill your son and your wife, and then they roll up in a tank and start making fun of your dead wife. And if that wasn't bad enough, what follows is simultaneously the dumbest and the funniest thing of the entire siege. So whoever's talking in the megaphone, which is really hard to hear, by the way, because like the family later said that everything was like echoey and it was hard to make out, you know, words or whatever. Whoever's talking in the megaphone says that now, after 3 people are dead, they want to negotiate. And because, you know, Randy doesn't have a telephone line or anything like that, they decide to send him one. So they get a little robot that's got like these dozer tracks on it and has a phone line attached to the top of it. So this little robot rolls out and like makes its way up to the front door of the Weaver's house. Randy takes one look at it and notices it has a shotgun pointed directly at the phone.
The robot was sitting right in front, right up against and right in front of the door. The robot had a claw and it had a 12-gauge shotgun that was right in the door.
But once again, as far as I know, that was an oversight.
I cannot make this up. All the shooting goes down and the FBI decides that they're going to try to talk to him, and they do it with a robot holding a gun at the thing he's supposed to put his face up to. The FBI would later say that this was an oversight. I don't believe him. I absolutely don't believe him. Who rigs up the phone robot and has it ready to go and then turns to his buddy and is like, get the shotgun off of that, right? And the other guy's like, nah, it'll be fine. What is this guy, paranoid? It's like, you know that meme of like the mousetraps in the 1800s that's just a piece of cheese with a pistol aimed at it? That's literally what they tried to get Randy with. And keep in mind, this guy thinks that the FBI just wants to kill him. They don't want to negotiate. They don't want him to get arrested. They just want him to step on the porch so a sniper can kill him, right? And then they're like, oh no, talk to our friendly robot, and the robot has a gun. So needless to say, negotiations just don't happen. Throughout the day, the APCs begin to move to different positions around the Weaver's house. And again, the Weavers are afraid to like peek over the window to see what's going on for fear of being shot. So they just laid in the floor and listened to like tanks drive around their house all day. And at 8 p.m. on August the 23rd, they start to clear out little buildings like, you know, a chicken coop and sheds and stuff like that around the actual cabin itself. And at 8 p.m., they go to the shed that Sam's body is lying in, and they open the shed and see a dead child and go, oh, because again, they just assumed everyone was alive and that no one had been killed, despite 2 different gunmen absolutely should at least have known that someone was killed. And it is at this point that things start to change. An analysis is done on Sam's body, and it's seen that the shot that killed him was in the back. And that makes the FBI, specifically people like the leader of the operation, Gene Glenn, start to ask some questions. Because again, the narrative that the FBI is working off of was that the marshals stood up, identified themselves, and then Harris took a shot. And even if that were the case, what was the scenario of events that led to a 14-year-old boy being shot in the back? So on August the 24th, Gene begins to send agents to the Y to investigate what they find. Because again, the narrative provided to the FBI by the marshals was that it was a massive gunfight, they were being held down, a bunch of shots fired, but then when agents get to the Y, there's like a dozen, maybe a couple dozen casings at most. So the FBI start to ask questions of the United States Marshals. This is where a lot of the original testimonies that were later brought up in court came from. Now, at the same time this is happening, another thing that's been going on since the first day of the siege is a bunch of local people have been showing up at the base of Ruby Ridge to protest the FBI's involvement. Initially, it was a bunch of people standing around the FBI saying stuff like, if you do anything, you know, there will be witnesses, we'll attest to what you do. And once it was found out that Sam had been killed, it basically turned into the FBI as a mob. The FBI starts to put the pieces together and say that maybe we got a lot of this wrong. And the first change comes on August the 26th when the FBI finally gets rid of the rules of engagement and moves it to the normal rules of engagement that you shoot someone if they're in immediate danger to someone else's life. It was also around this time that the situation at the roadblock was getting more and more hectic. Not only were hundreds of people there to protest, but remember how I said Randy had connections to Aryan nations? Well, Aryan Nation members started to show up because in the news, the narrative was that Randy Weaver and his entire family were white supremacists. And as discussed earlier, that's at least kind of true for Randy himself. But it didn't help the public outlook of the event when the camera panned over and there was a bunch of people doing, you know, the SIG hail and whatnot. The one device that the Weavers did have to listen to the outside world was a radio. And during the entire standoff, the radio was left on as they were hearing updates about what was happening at the bottom of the mountain. Randy began to fear that the government may storm the house in order to end the siege. But he also doesn't want to step out of the house because he assumes they're just going to shoot him. So on August the 26th, the same day that the rules of engagement were loosened, Randy asked to speak to his sister Marnish Joy, who he heard on the radio, arrived at the checkpoint. For 2 days, the APC comes up to the mountain and his sister begins to speak with the megaphone, but because the FBI won't let her leave the APC, Randy can't really hear her and she can't really hear him. You know, we wouldn't want these guys to have got an innocent woman killed in the midst of all this, right? On August the 27th, Randy hears over the radio that Bo Gritz has arrived at the bottom of Ruby Ridge. That name probably doesn't mean a lot to most of you, but in the 90s, Bo Gritz was seen as a prominent figure within military communities. Bo Gritz served in Vietnam as a Green Beret, and after the war was over, was very instrumental in getting prisoners of war and those missing in action out of Vietnam. He started a bunch of campaigns to support veterans, he would tour around to gun shows and stuff like that, and in 1988, he even ran for president. So basically, Bo Gritz was the kind of guy that Weaver would respect. So similar to Randy's sister, the FBI drove him up next to Randy's house in the APC. Bo Gritz tries communicating through the megaphone, says, "This is stupid," and just walks out of the APC. He walks all the way onto the front porch of Weaver's cabin, knocks on the door, and asks to talk. The first time in the midst of all of this, someone just had a conversation. Bo asks Randy what's going on. Bo had been briefed on the
Bo
situation
Gritz for the
as far as
win.
the FBI had known. Randy responds by saying, "I've been shot, Harris is bleeding out, and Vicky's dead." He immediately gets back in the APC and goes back down to the FBI's command post, where he tells everyone what happened. When the announcement was made that Vicky Weaver was killed by the second sniper shot, the angry crowd that was at the bottom of the mountain turned into a mob. Pressure was mounting fast for the FBI to do something, because so far it looks like they
What's
messed
the
up.
FBI gonna do?
If something good doesn't come out of this, they'd be in a lot of trouble. Over the next
Oh
couple
no,
days,
not
Bo
the
Gritz made
FBI, they're in
trips back and
trouble.
forth from the cabin. As you can imagine, Randy is furious and does not want to come out of the cabin as he's afraid he'll be killed. It's also worth noting, Randy and Harris were so convinced that they were going to die that they had Sarah write up their testimony of everything that went down, so that way if they die, there will be some evidence of their version of events. Bo assesses the condition of Harris, who is feverish, his wound looks awful, and he's probably got 72 hours left in him. He tells Randy that Randy can take his time and come to whatever he wants, but they need to get Harris to the hospital right now. Harris reluctantly agrees and is accompanied by Bo to the bottom of the hill, where he turns himself in at 6:27 p.m. on August the 3rd. He's immediately transported by helicopter to a nearby hospital, and after receiving medical attention, Harris makes a full recovery. As soon as Harris surrenders,
Got
Bo
to be able to get
Gritz,
moved.
along with a friend of the Weavers named Jackie Brown, come back to the cabin to move Vicky's body. Vicky had been lying in the floor of that house for 9 days at this point. The girls had laid on sheets, but the area around was stained black with the carnage of the gunshot. It was a very, very brutal sight, and Randy agreed that to whatever effect can be done at this point, Vicky's body should be taken care of. As Bo and Jackie pick up her body and begin to leave, the daughters plead with him to not let her body touch the ground. When Vicky's body is brought to the bottom of the mountain, there's kind of like conflicting reports as to what the FBI's response is at that point. All of them agree the situation needs to end soon, that this has gone on for too long, but there's disagreement as to what that looks like. Many think that the use of extreme force would be necessary because it's Randy's fault that all of this has transpired. On the morning of August the 31st, Bo Gritz comes to Randy and tells him effectively that the FBI wants this to be over. They're getting hasty, and I don't know what decision they're going to make. But if you come with me right now, I promise Nothing bad will happen to you, and I'll walk down there with you together. Randy, destroyed and trusting Mo at this point, takes his daughters with him, and together, the 4 survivors exit the cabin. Which means on the morning of August 31st, the 11-day siege of Ruby Ridge finally ended. Randy was arrested and taken to receive medical treatment for his gunshot wound. I didn't really mention it earlier, but the bullet passed clean through on him, so while it hurt a lot, he didn't have a lot of damage to his body. The daughters were taken by the state and eventually sent to live with their grandparents, before after that living with their aunt and uncle, who they were closer to. Both Randy and Harris were arrested and charged for the first-degree murder of Marshall Deegan. Again, the marshal who was shot when all of this began. To give you an idea of how gung-ho the feds were to get a charge on somebody in the midst of this, they briefly considered charging Sarah as an adult and also implicating her in the first-degree murder. However, this idea was eventually dropped. In the media, there was a lot of misinformation that was passed around during this time. For example, it said that Randy and Weaver had served together in Vietnam, and that's why Randy went out with Bo. But that's not true. As mentioned earlier, Randy was never in the Green Berets. Actually, come to think of it, that's probably why the false was a Green Beret was passed around. Because Bo Gritz definitely was a Green Beret, so if the news kept saying they served together, that would mean Randy was also probably a Green Beret. But yeah, that just didn't happen. Both sides of the argument had extreme perspectives of why this situation began. Sides that were pro-government said that Randy had effectively lured the feds into a trap to try to kill him, while the other side said that the feds planned to assault Randy's cabin that day and kill him and the rest of his family members, which again also didn't happen. And it was a lot of he said, she said leading up to the trial. Defense attorney Jerry Spence took the case. Jerry Spence was known for being a very charismatic kind of showmanship of a lawyer. So when the trial rolled around, Spence had a very unique approach. During the entirety of the trial, Spence did not call forward a single witness. Instead, he just cross-examined everything that the FBI or the Marshals or the ATF had done, and that was enough information to win over the jury. During the cross-examination of the ATF, Jerry points out that the ATF informant asked Randy if he could get the agent the short-barreled shotguns, which is entrapment. You can't, as a cop, make someone or ask someone to do a crime and then arrest them for said crime. So he gets that thrown out. On the matter of first-degree murder, he goes over all the details I talked about earlier about what went down at the Y. And it's clear, comparing evidence to testimony, that the agent side of the story doesn't make a lot of sense. Not only were there holes in their narrative, like one agent said the shot started at this moment and another one said the shots actually started at this moment, but they had changed their account so many times that it was easy to poke holes in. He eventually ruled that every action that Randy Weaver, as well as Harris and the rest of the Weaver family took, was reasonable for someone who was randomly attacked by extreme force with no chance to surrender. The trial began on April the 13th of 1993. Randy had been charged with 10 different charges, from the first-degree murder and the short-barreled shotguns I already mentioned, to things like conspiracy. Is that a mosquito? To things like conspiracy and resisting arrest and blah blah blah. When the trial ended in June of 1993, Randy had been acquitted for every single charge except the original failure to appear in court. For that charge, Randy was sentenced to 18 months in jail and a $10,000 fine. However, he was credited with time served since he had been in jail for over a year already awaiting trial. And Randy Weaver was released in December of 1993. In the meantime, Harris's shot against Marshall Deegan was ruled as justified and he was let go with full acquittal. 5 years later, when a new local prosecutor came to Madison County, he tried to prosecute Harris over this shooting again. I guess that prosecutor was just really mad that he got away with
Parkour
it,
works
but
against you a lot of the
obviously that
time.
couldn't
It's
go
so
through because
annoying.
double jeopardy. The same FBI hostage rescue team that was at Ruby Ridge would be deployed to another little location called Waco, Texas that same year. In response to this, the Department of Justice had a massive
Good fight.
crackdown
He
on
played
FBI
well. I
operations.
liked him.
They assembled something called the Ruby
I had no
Ridge
issue with the way he
Task Force
played.
that compiled
Nothing.
a
Good shit.
542-page report of the HRT's actions both at Ruby Ridge and Waco. The main things they criticized about Ruby Ridge was the rules of engagement and Toriuchi's second shot. Largely because of the events of Ruby Ridge, Rules of engagement have
I'm gonna go to bed here, guys. Thank you so much. This has been a 13-hour and 42-minute stream and a 13-hour recording. And just a reminder, you've been watching Skycat Live. And let me kill this so I can talk. Sorry. I'm tired. I walked for like, I don't know, 2-3 miles today, something like that, and I'm just sort of wiped out. And gonna go to bed. Yep, can barely think or talk. So, as always, this session was recorded, and it will be placed on my YouTube. And thank you so much for your time today, guys. I will be placing this video on my YouTube here, and thank you so much for watching me today. Just a reminder, you've been watching Skycat Live, and I'm a full-time variety gamer all day, every day. Put me on in the background. Click on the cat's face to donate. And thank you so much. Come sub to me on Twitch, or if you're on watching me on YouTube, come click on the cat's face to donate. And as always, this 14-hour session or 13-hour session will be placed on my YouTube channel right now as we speak, and I will create and upload a video. And so with that, I will say good night to you guys, or good day, whatever the case may be. I love you guys. Catch me tomorrow for more of the same. Thank you so much for your time. It was good. It was a good day. Got me a nice Kraken Club, Rare X Kraken Club today. It was a good day in the day of Skycat. It was one of the best items in Final Fantasy. It's actually pretty cool. So on that note, I love you guys, and I will see you later. Bye. So yeah, we're done with the sessions. Good. Stop recording. Yes.